Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you an image quality breakdown from the brand new Fujinon XF 200mm f2 OIS lens. And so if you missed my first look episode where I went over this lens, I recommend that you take a look at that because this really is a brand new kind of concept for Fuji's mirrorless system. And so in this case, I've been doing the review on the new Fuji X-T3, and also I have another episode where I'm looking at the X-T3 in my first overview, looking at that as well. And so if you've missed either one of those episodes, I'd recommend that you take a look at them. But we're going to break down the image quality today. Obviously, this is a very large lens for the system, and it sets by a wide margin a new kind of high watermark for price point for the Fuji system. And so we're going to break down different metrics, you know, sharpness, bokeh quality, flare resistance, color, all of those things. And so let's jump in and let's take a look at how it performs both in the bare lens, and we'll also look at it a bit with the 1.4 times teleconverter attached. So at this point, we typically start off by looking at the vignette and distortion and the things that need correction in post. Well, here you've got it right here. And while there is some embedded corrections that do come over with Fuji files, the reality is that in terms of what you need to do once you open the file, there is literally nothing that needs to be done here. I mean, there is no apparent vignette, even illumination across the frame. There is no apparent distortion. Everything just looks fantastic. And as we can see as we zoom into a pixel level, I mean, the amount of detail and resolution there is really, really fantastic. And as you can see, there is essentially no change from, you know, from center to this edge to the right edge. This is all at f2. I mean, if I go up to the extreme corner, I mean, resolution, contrast is perfect. I go up into that corner, resolution and contrast, perfect. I go into this corner, resolution, contrast, perfect. And guess what? Bottom right corner, everything is perfect. I mean, this is an optically stunning lens. So will we see any difference if we stop things down to f2.8? I do think that our amount of kind of illumination is a little brighter, but in terms of the amount of detail or contrast, I mean, it's kind of hard to improve on perfection. And so what you see is that it was perfect and it remains perfect when you stop down. And so, I mean, the reality is you can use depth of field, or use aperture, I should say, more about just adding more depth of field where necessary. You don't need it to improve sharpness in any way, shape, or form. Because there's really nothing more to see there, I'm just going to jump right into real world examples to show you what I'm talking about. And so here, this is just available light. I mean, if you look at the fur on the dog's leg, I mean, wow. I mean, look at how beautifully delineated every little hair is. I mean, that amount of detail is just really fantastic. I mean, and of course, as you can see, we've got a beautifully creamy, you know, defocus region before and after the plane of focus. I mean, yeah, it's amazing. Here's another one of the animals around my house. This is Ferrari. And so once again, as you can see, if you zoom into a pixel level, I mean, this again, f2, look at the amount of just stunning detail that is there on the face of the cat. And then once again, you can see, you know, beautiful, very thin, razor thin, you know, depth of field there, plane of focus, but just fantastic detail on our subject. And then a nice fall off towards defocus. Here's a very straightforward, simple image, just a pier that's sticking up out of the water here. But once again, I mean, the amount of total contrast is there is fantastic. And if you look in at the details, the micro contrast on all of these textures is just really, really fantastic. I mean, it's just a stunning amount of detail. And once again, this is at f2. I also use the lens in an event type setting, and so as you can see, I mean, just great detail on a subject, you know, and I'm shooting from probably about 40 feet away at this point. So you're gonna need a fairly large size venue to use this as an event lens. Remember, this is an equivalent of a little over 300 millimeters on a full frame sensor, but at the same time, I mean, the amount of detail and I mean, just all of it is really fantastic. And so, and of course at f2, you have the opportunity to use relatively low shutter speeds, and so it helps you to keep your ISO value down, and you know, just stunningly good skin tones and textures. And again, I probably was at least 40 feet away in shooting this, and look at the amount of detail on this man's face. Really fantastic. You know, and so as you can see, I mean, just the whole package there, the skin tones, the detail, it's all really fantastic. And I should point out that this particular image is shot at ISO 3200, which also goes to show that this paired with the new Fuji X-T3 sensor it's pretty fantastic. I mean, I don't think you're missing full frame too bad with a shot like this. So is it perfect? Well, not exactly. I mean, you can see that in this particular image where I've got the sun just right outside the frame here, you can see that we've got a little bit of, well, we've got some veiling that is entered into the frame. No real ghosting artifacts here, but certainly there is some veiling, loss of contrast from that. And then if I stop down to f11 and I put the sun right there outside the frame, I mean, this is kind of a situation you're unlikely to actually employ very often in real world shooting, but you can see a bit of a ghosting pattern of the prism of light coming down through that. So, I mean, the situations where this is going to be a real issue are probably fairly few and far between, but just know you can get some veiling, and if it's really stopped down, you can get a bit of ghosting as well. Now here's a shot of some morning blades of grass here, and so obviously if we go to a pixel level, I mean, the amount of information there is really beautiful. I mean, great detail. However, this image does show what can be a liability for a lens that is so perfectly corrected, and that is that the quality of the bokeh isn't as soft as a lens that ironically has more flaws, you know, things like chromatic aberrations and a little bit lower contrast. And so if there's any place that this lens suffers in comparison to, say, the 200 millimeter f2s from Canon or Nikon, I would say it's in that metric. Now, obviously, in this case, we're looking at a you know, almost completely blown out background, and that's certainly something this lens is very capable of. It's not hard to achieve this, considering how much compression you get and how wide that maximum aperture is. So obviously there is zero to complain about when it comes to the bokeh quality here, you know, and so you could certainly use it in that kind of situation and achieve that kind of result. Here's another example that I think, you know, it's kind of similar conditions to the blades of grass that we saw, but in this case you can see, because there's a little bit more deeper defocused area, we can see that really the bokeh quality is not bad at all. And of course, look at the detail. Just incredible detail that is there from this lens. Really fantastic. And so, I mean, the whole package is pretty sweet, all things considered. Now, that great image quality would of course be wasted if the focus system couldn't keep up, but what I found is that this lens combined with the X-T3 is a pretty sweet combination for tracking. I mean, this was one of a sequence, but you can see just how well focused that image is, and it was a high-speed burst. The cat was chasing the dog because we do things backwards at my house. And anyway, and so you can see that, and I'll cover autofocus a little bit more in my final review, but really the X-T3 and the XF 200mm f2 is a great combination. And particularly when you consider how razor thin the depth of field is here, we're looking at an, you know, essentially on a full frame, this is a 305mm f2.8 lens. And so, I mean, just look at how shallow the depth of field is. And so the pressures that are there to get a fast moving shot like this, I mean, focus is really fantastic. And so that helps you to really maximize the potential of that. Here's another, I mean, it doesn't look like the dog's running fast because it's a very high shutter speed, but she was running, you know, with the ball. And so you can see great focus, you know, great detail, and of course, a beautifully defocused background here, just of the lawn itself due to that long focal length and wide maximum aperture. So here's another example here. You can see that just, I mean, some of these bokeh highlights get a little bit, you know, maybe busy looking. But if you look at the image at large, of course, it looks pretty fantastic. And of course, once again, focus has nailed to make this a special image. Here's more of a panning type shot where I was coming across and following the action from side to side. And once again, you can see that it's done a great job, both the focus and then also the just, you know, the look of the image at large. Now, I did use this as a portrait lens, and as you can see, it delivers a really beautiful result. I mean, obviously a very, very three-dimensional look of our subject, you know, and kind of a completely defocused background. And so if we want to shoot environmental portraits, obviously you're going to need some space to work with. Now, this is just done shooting with available light. Of course, the lens sucks in so much light and blows out the background so much that if you've got some working distance, it really can produce some quite beautiful portrait results. And so certainly a secondary application of this lens, or, you know, could be a primary if you are a portrait photographer and you do more environmental outside type portraits. I mean, there's nothing really to compare with this on a Fuji platform to this degree. And so certainly a very, very achieving result. Here is one here at the end that I've actually done some processing to, and these are actually, the falling snow is faked. It's through overlays that I've developed, some that are real snow and then some that are simulated, and so I have them where I can add them into images. Of course, the nice thing about this is that, you know, I'm able to allow the face to be clear of the heavy snow. So it just makes for a kind of an enchanting result. But it does show you that this lens is capable of producing some pretty stunning portraits. And here's something else that I will highlight in the final review a little bit more, but the lens has such an effective image stabilizer on it, optical stabilizer, that the byproduct of that is that it does, I wanted to show you from an image quality perspective, because it does give you the potential to play with some different looks. And so in this case, I've dragged the shutter purposefully, knowing that I'm going to get a pretty sharp subject. I think this is at no more than 1/10 of a second. So it's not perfectly sharp, but for the look of it, it works, and thus it allows me to get the movement of the snow falling, which gives you a completely different kind of look. This is a handheld image, so pretty unique for sure. So the XF 200mm f2 does come in a kit with a 1.4 times teleconverter that is purpose designed for this lens. And so of course you go to a 300mm lens with that teleconverter attached and a maximum aperture of f2.8. So obviously also a very compelling combination there, and which makes it even more useful for like wildlife or sports. So what we're going to see here is that there is a little bit of a loss of contrast, and not that you can tell it too much from this, but I'll show you more in just a moment. But what we can also see is that amazing amount of resolution. It's not quite as perfect in the extreme corners, but over most of the frame at f2.8 here, it is, you know, it's pretty close to flawless, other than a little loss of contrast. Stopping down to f4, it really does not make a huge amount of difference. As you can see, it doesn't look much different than what it did at f2.8, and so it's, you know, it's already very sharp. We'll go on down to f5.6. You can see a little bit of vignette that is cleared, and, you know, maybe possibly a little uptick in contrast, but I don't really see much of anything. I think that you're getting pretty close to maximum image quality. This lens is essentially optimized to deliver image quality at f2, and so stopping down does not really make a huge amount of improvement to it. So what I found in real world shooting is that, you know, basically all of those good qualities of the lens are retained with this combination. But as you can see, there is a little loss of contrast there with the teleconverter attached. Just a little bit of haze that's there. I mean, there's obviously still great detail, but a little bit of haze there that's not available there with the bare lens. But at the same time, obviously that's a very, very useful end result. And looking at it globally, it's sharp, it's got good contrast. You know, it's still a great looking image. One final one to look at. And so this shows you, of course, a massive amount of compression. And this dog wandered out on the road and I saw an opportunity. And so looking at it globally, it looks fantastic. If you zoom into a pixel level, you can see just a little bit of that loss of contrast that I'm referring to. But you can also see that it looks pretty fantastic. I mean, and I haven't seen the background get kind of, you know, squirrely or busy with the teleconverter attached. And so certainly having this option to give you two different focal lengths, both with huge maximum apertures, is a huge plus. So as you can see, there's no question that this lens kind of delivers on the promise that is there by its physical appearance and of course also by its price point. There's very, very little to complain about there. It is incredibly sharp. I mean, it's one of the sharpest lenses that I've ever used in terms of being absolutely sharp, corner to corner at f2, and the image that it delivers to you is pristine. And so the only place where I think that there's any penalty to pay for that pristine kind of perfect correctedness is when it comes to the bokeh quality, which is, I don't think it's as creamy as, say, what you're going to see from either the Canon or Nikon 200mm f2 lenses. And I realize that's not entirely apples to apples because you're comparing a full frame versus APS-C. But at the same time, I think that if you were to jump over and compare it to, say, the Canon 300mm f2.8 LIS Mark II, I think that you would come to a similar conclusion. That being said, I mean, I'm nitpicking. I'm trying to find something there to point to. The reality is the image quality is gorgeous from this lens. It's going to be a really, for people that have been looking for a true kind of either super telephoto, you know, for wildlife, sports, even event shooting, and as we saw here, doubles down as a pretty fabulous portrait lens as well. This, you know, allows for a completely unique kind of thing on the Fuji system. And so I think that while it's obviously for a fairly niche market, I think it's going to be a very welcome addition to the catalog of lenses for Fuji. Stay tuned and I will be back to you with my final verdict, and I'll, you know, give you a little bit more detail, show you a number of tracking sequences, because obviously autofocus is very important, as is kind of the whole autofocusing combination. It's going to be seriously used for sports or wildlife, and so we'll cover that in the final review, and as well as I'll give you a little more information on the OIS, which by the way is one of the very, very best that I've used, and kind of wrap everything up there at that point. So stay tuned, I'll be back for that with that shortly, as well as ongoing coverage of the Fuji X-T3 along with, you know, some of the other camera systems that I'm currently looking at the moment. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, I do have my image gallery that's going there right now. And so you can get, you know, see more photos there, and there are also buying links from a number of retailers if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. And of course, you can also find linkage there to, you know, become one of my patrons or sign up for my newsletter, follow me on social media. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.